Okay, so now we're carrying on with natural change. Okay, so this is topic 3 now. Um, since I'm pretty close to the exam, um, I'm gonna have to leave 4 and 5. They're kind of similar. I think what's the best thing to do is just look at that diagram we drew. Um, talking about um, perinatal, neonatal, um, postnatal, all these different types of natals and their definitions. That's what you're gonna have to do. Obviously, there'll be things on the side, but yeah, I'm gonna have to miss those out because 6 and 7, 8, 9 is a bit more lacking in my knowledge. So, all right, we'll just get started on this. Okay, so with natural change, right? What we're focusing on here is how the population, oops, how the population changes over time, right? Because we're still talking about dynamics, but now we are just looking at natural changes. So birth rate, death rate, and marriage. Okay. And to be honest, for this one, we're going to leave marriage. Um, and you could probably guess what the definitions would be once we have looked at a few. So, yeah, let's talk about birth rate and death rate first. So, firstly, birth rate and death rate. How can we observe changes in these values, in these parameters? So, we have to look at registries, yeah, birth rate, death rate registries. And for birth rate specifically, we can use things like URS and census. So URS is like a universal registration system. So, each hospital, they would have a kind of a library, you could say, of birth rates, maybe for that year or month or whatever. So, okay, so birth rate. What I've done here is every time I've included this squiggly thing, it just means for that year. So birth rate is the live births over 1,000 women, okay, for that year. And like I said, you can find this out through the URS and censuses. And here I've included some of the reasons why birth rate and death rate birth rate might go up or down. One reason is because of nurseries, right? So the lecturer, when he was talking about one child policy and how they've uplifted this rule since 2015, okay, the reason why these women reluctant to have another kid is because the competition to get your kid included in the nurseries is quite high. Not to mention, obviously, the potential um, expenses. If a family can afford these things, because the nurseries over there, like I said, are quite competitive and expensive. All right, living costs, pretty standard. Government incentives. All right, so how much does the government provide support? Because Bulgaria themselves, they provide a lot. I'm not going to go too much into that. And women's work opportunities. So yeah, that makes sense. Women having kids later on in life. And if you really want to impress the people, the examiners, yeah, you can drop a stat or two. So I put the two I's, Ireland and Italy. So the reason why Ireland is so high is something that will really impress them. You just talk about religion being a big factor in birth rate. Yeah, Ireland mainly Catholic origin, family centered. Yeah, they're gonna have a high birth rate. Otherwise, the other European countries, they're not so high. I mean, their average, right? I think it's around 7 or 6 in the EU, something like that. So yeah, live births over 1,000 for that year. Fertility rate. So, you know what, I think everything is just gonna be for that year. So, fertility rate is live births again, same thing. Live births over 1,000 in the population. And this is a bit more specific now. This is exclusive to 15 to 49-year-olds because they're the prime age for pregnancies. And so what I've done here is I've split up the definitions that you'll be required to know. So I split up replacement level and total fertility. So when we talk about replacement level, we're just talking about how many kids do we need to have in that year so that we basically replenish the previous kind of a level, fertility level. So obviously you have, you know, a mom and a dad. They would need to essentially have 2 kids to equal things up. So this is the rate at which the population replaces itself, and we do not include migration. We don't include migration. So replacement level, replacement. What's the rate at which the population replaces itself? And again, if you want to impress these guys, you could talk about a certain paradox, because you would think, like I said here, these religious centered countries, you know, they should have a higher birth rate. They do have a higher birth rate, but they should have a higher fertility rate. But that's not the case because, well, we don't know. It's a paradox. Israel has like 3.2. Nordic countries have a high amount. I can't really remember. EU has like 1.6. Yeah, so EU is quite low, and Israel and the Nordic countries, they're quite high, and they're not really religious. Yeah, so that's paradox there. So that's replacement. Now total fertility. Now we could split this up into gross and net fertility. Gross. Here we're just looking at accumulation. Yeah, only accumulation, and you'll see what I mean. So I had to draw in pictures because it's kind of a big definition. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that gross fertility rate is the number of live born girls that are born to a 15 to 49-year-old, and their age specific fertility rate is equal to that year, right? So this is just trying to say that from when these guys were born, age specific fertility rate is equal to that year. So in that year, if the fertility rate was like 2.1, we look into, you know what, it is kind of confusing, man. They have to make it so complicated. The number of live girls born to a 15 to 49-year-old, if the age specific fertility rate is equal to that year. Yeah, maybe we're just looking into account what the rate is for that year, and then comparing it with how much kids a woman has. All right, move on to net. So that was accumulation. Now we're looking at net. So we're looking at accumulation and deprivation. So now what we're doing is we're including time. Okay. So this is the number of live born girls that are born to a woman over her life. Over her life, that's a time bit. If the age specific fertility rate and the mortality rate, so this is the deprivation I'm talking about, it's gross. I'm sorry, it's net. Net is including everything. Gross, it's just accumulation. Here we don't have mortality rate, here we do. And it's for that year as well. Okay, now quickly moving on to death rate and crude mortality rate. What is this? Number of deaths over 1,000 in the population for that year. We're always talking about average. And what could be the reasons for this? Is it number one, age related? So obviously, oh, yeah. If you looked on a lecture, you would have seen this graph. Is the bathtub graph, bathtub, and basically it's saying born, death. This is like 0 years, and this is like 100 years. So on either side of the spectrum, you're more likely to die. So think of this as like a XY axis, and this is like death rate potential, and this is like age, and age increases. When you're very young, you have a high likelihood to die, and when you're old, you have a high likelihood to die. In the middle, you have a less likelihood. So age, cause of death when you're younger could be various things, hygiene, um, medical complications, that sort of thing, and life expectancy. So yeah, this is kind of relating to two. If the baby has some congenital disorder, has a less likelihood of surviving a longer time than someone without a defect. So yeah, that's about it. So like I said, for the other one, just look at that graph we drew. You know what? I might just have a quick look at it here, so you can look at it as well. If I can find it. All right, here it is. So I might as well have a look myself because I haven't really looked into it too much. So abortion is pre 26 weeks. This is when not all the organs are formed. I can have a quick look at what the actual definition here is. So it's the interruption of a pregnancy before the fetus to meet the above criteria. And I think the above criteria is talking about the live birth criteria. Sorry. I forgot to put down in the other one live birth. So live birth is basically the completion of extracting a fetus, and the fetus will or should show signs of breathing and life, heartbeat. So this is basically the successful extraction and the baby showing signs of life. I'm obviously simplifying it, but you know what I mean. So that's abortion, right? Pre 26 weeks. Then from 26 weeks to birth, okay, if they were to die, the kid is a stillbirth, right? Anything before birth is prenatal, anything after birth is postnatal, but that's a bit of a trick question because it's not actually postnatal. Postnatal goes from birth to 28 days. It's weird, I don't know. Pre goes from 26 weeks to birth. Post goes from birth to 28 days. So it's kind of equal either side. Perinatal period is the period between 26 weeks of gestation and 7 days. And either side, the complications of death. Sorry, not the complications of death. Here are the activities for health, for healthy basically just to make sure your baby's healthy. The activities you would do is screening mainly. Now moving on to neonatal period, we have early neonatal and late neonatal. Early neonatal from birth to 7 days, and late neonatal from 7 to 28 days, and all this comes under neonatal period. Okay, so most things come from before 28 days. You have pre and postnatal, and you have early and late neonatal, and then you have perinatal as well, and post neonatal is 28 days to 1 year. Now she may ask you, for each kind of section, what's the complications that might happen. So this is some things I've got. So from birth to 7 days, the complications could be trauma or organ defects or infection from the hospital. Okay, from 7 to 28 days, you could have hygiene problems, diet, trauma. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there.